Hi friends, it's Katie from Without a Crystal Ball. Welcome back to my channel. It's Wednesday, August 21st, 2024, and I hope everyone's having a wonderful day. Yesterday, I let you all know that Jana Duggar is moving to Nebraska after she spent 34 years living at the Duggar compound under the patriarch of Jim Bob Duggar. And there was a wedding that occurred last week after a very secretive courtship between Jana and Stephen Wisman, and Jana will be joining the Wisman family, which is the family of Lauren and Gloria Wisman, located in Nebraska. They are part of the Mennonite faith and are a little bit less conservative than the Duggars, but obviously close enough that Jim Bob feels comfortable sending his daughter away to Stephen. Stephen at 31 and Jana at 34 are in the fundamentalist world old to get married, as most people in this culture get married when they're like right after they graduate high school, 18, 19, 20 years old. So it's not old in the real world, though. Just want to be clear about that. And unfortunately, in the fundamentalist world, there's not as many options once you get older. So I think a lot of people end up getting married younger. Regardless of all of that, Jana's wedding followed a lot of speculation about Jim Bob and his control of the girls and getting married and, not allowing girls to leave the house unless they get married. Jill Duggar's book, Counting the Cost, actually, she wrote about all of the steps that have to be taken in order to go through a courtship. And she discussed that, when you do get ready for marriage, you can't actually marry anyone without the blessing of your parent. She wrote, I also knew my parents loved me and wanted the best for me, so I wasn't like mom and pops were ever going to actually arrange our marriages and force us to marry someone. But without our parents' blessing, there was simply no way that any relationship would ever be able to begin. Years and years of IBL teaching had taught us that no good Christian child should consider going against our parents' wishes. Number one on the list of requirements in a future spouse was that they had the approval of our parents. Without that, it was game over before things had even begun. We were encouraged not to just sit around waiting for our future mate to show up, but instead occupy our time in ways that distracted us from constant thoughts of marriage. Mr. Gothard even taught that it was best to make a vow of single service, committing a specific number of years to serving God while single. His teaching was compelling, but I preferred to commit to serve God, my family, and others just until God brought my future husband along. I dressed conservatively, but inside I was a normal girl interested in romance and love just like anyone else. So they were also encouraged to tell their parents if they liked someone, and Jim Bob was known to try to set up the girls with suitors, and they were not allowed to actually approach a guy for courtship. Only a boy was allowed to approach them. So there's limitations in these relationships, and as Jill said, they can't happen unless mom and dad approve, even if you're 34 years old. And the same book, and in Ginger's book, she speaks about the teaching that Gothard had that women and girls cannot move out of their family home until they're married. Boys have a completely different set of standards. Girls cannot. Even though some of the Duggar boys remain at home, they have more freedom. And even Jeremiah and Jed lived on their own before they were ever married. There's been so much discussion about this marriage and why it feels a little bit staged or even orchestrated by the family and what this could mean for Jana. Now, regardless, Jana seems happy, Stephen seems happy, and in their world, this might feel happy for them. You have to remember the IBLP is very different than our world, and the way that you and I might find our mate and find our one is very different, and their concept of happiness is also very different. So in Jana's world, this might be her happily ever after, but Jill's book proves that it was up to Jim Bob to decide if a relationship can go through, if the wedding can happen. It's his ultimate decision at the end of the day. And that's the teaching of Gothard. Some of the girls that have married into the family, like Katie Nakatsu, went as extreme as allowing her father to even pick out her suitor, regardless if she knew the guy or not. So this concept that there's freedom of choice in this world it's a very fine line. The girls feel like there's a choice when the reality is there's not. Now, when it comes to this wedding, there was a lot of questions about Jill and Jana, and I did a video the other day and I discussed how this kind of underlined some of the damage that's been done to the family. And Jill wrote about in her book, Counting the Cost, that when she and Derek broke from the family and decided to ask their dad for payment and push back and say no to filming and push back about, what was happening within the family, push back against some of these rules and guidelines that were happening and these expectations that the kids basically live under his control as the head patriarch of the family, regardless if they were married or not. Because under the belief system of the IBLP, there's like the umbrella of authority. And so the kids are supposed to stay under the umbrella of protection of their parents. But even after married, some patriarchs will say that they still have their children underneath their umbrella, even though they're not. It doesn't make sense. But Jim Bob, according to Jill, had this belief that he wanted to have more control over the married kids' lives than he really ought to have. And that fight between her and Jim Bob created friction in the family because she was also taught not to disobey her parents and always listen to them. And as a result of her disobedience, Jim Bob used and weaponized her sisters and her other siblings against her, and her relationships with her siblings still underneath his control waned and got very fractured, and she became the scapegoat, even though Josh is the one in prison. So Jill not being included in the wedding wasn't like necessarily her choice. It's the choice of the bride. And Jill did answer questions. She shared a bunch of pictures on her Instagram, and she said, "Why weren't you a bridesmaid? No hate, just genuinely curious." And she said, "I don't know, but it should always be the bride's decision." And said, someone else wrote, "Wow, what a wedding. Dancing. Jana looks fabulous and deserves her happiness after waiting so long. So pleased you were there." And she said, "Yeah, the first Duggar wedding with a first dance." Jill also answered this question, "Thanks for sharing. I hope your boys didn't miss out seeing their cousins." And she said, "Our kids were there the night before for the family dinner. We went kid-free to the wedding, and it was nice since space was tight anyways." And she shared photographs with people from the show and the crew. So there was some crew members there, but it was not filmed for a show. Another person said, "Some were questioning if you attended the wedding. I'm so glad you did. You look lovely as always." And she said, "Yes, thanks. Yes, we were invited to attend. She was a beautiful bride. We wish them all the best." And then someone else said, "I'm so glad you guys went. I was worried you didn't go." And she said, "We wouldn't have missed it." So Jill's obvious exclusion from the wedding party was what I was speaking about when I spoke about the rift in the family, right? So Jill and Jana were like best friends growing up, and Jill and Jana's relationship only fractured once she and Derek split from the norms of the family and didn't obey what Jim Bob wanted them to do, okay? And then Jill wrote about in her book, Counting the Cost, which all of you should read if you're questioning. If you're someone that's here that supports the Duggars, I would encourage you to read Jill's book. I would encourage you to read the court records. I would encourage you to read the testimony from Josh's trial. I would encourage you to read the actual court records, not just what the Duggars tell you. Because this wedding on the surface looks good, right? Because Jim Bob is able to take back a narrative, but it doesn't actually change anything. He thinks it will, but it doesn't. And I can tell you why there's been a lot of resistance from people about my coverage specifically. Jim Bob Duggar clearly has a motive with all of this and with what the photos are and what this is supposed to be for him. I know this because when I shared photographs from the wedding from other people sharing photographs, so Jana shared a bunch of photographs, I shared those to my Instagram, everyone's sharing them all over Instagram, but the photographer that took the photos specifically targeted me and was accusing me of defaming the family with a false narrative about the family and that I needed to take down all the photos. The only people allowed to share photos are people that are going to uplift the family and uplift Jana and share the beauty of the day. No one's allowed to use the photos to cast a negative light on the family. That's what they told me. Now, I don't know if that's the photographer's point of view or if that is Jim Bob, but it seems weird, right? We all know Jim Bob knows who I am. We all know that he's keeping track of this channel, and we all know that he's watching, and he pays attention to the criticism, and he knows that people from his insiders speak to me. He knows that former friends of his speak. In fact, I asked one of his former friends, why are they acting like this? Like, why would I have to remove all my photos that everyone else is sharing? And one photo, for instance, I just shared and I said, look, Jill's in the back here. Everything's good. I never said she wasn't invited. Here you go. Here's the family photo. There wasn't anything negative about the photo at all, but I had to take that one down too because I was defaming the family, right? So Jim Bob never reached out to me, never. And to be clear, like, I'm not going to try to disrespect a photographer and not, if they say, I don't want you to use my photos, I won't use your photos. So every photo that you're seeing in this video are photos that are actually taken by someone else that are not tagged to the photographer, that were shared either by Steven's siblings or Jana's siblings or friends of the family. I'm not sharing any official photographs from the wedding anymore. And Jim Bob is losing his ever-loving mind about it. And so not only am I getting messages from the photographer, who, by the way, like, every media outlet is using these photos and the headlines are not great, right? And a lot of them are bringing up the child abuse and the sexual abuse and the CSAM and Josh Duggar in these articles. And unfortunately, this photographer is working for a family that has scandal, but Jim Bob only wants to control how these photographs are used, okay? And that's why I'm pretty confident he sold them to people so that he could control how they're used. And he's known to do this. I'm not saying that he's telling the photographer to do this. I'm just saying. And this morning, on top of that, I woke up to an email from someone that claimed to be a friend of the Duggar family, which actually made me kind of laugh because there is no love like Duggar hate. And the person said, wow, I just want to say thank you for your YouTube videos regarding Jana Duggar. They prove what a lost, deceitful, and wicked world we live in. Your reporting is a disgraceful shame of mostly your opinion and assumption. You obviously believe the false information you report. May people who read and view your reporting be discerning and wise and not believe your twisted view. So my reporting includes stuff from Jill's book, stuff from court records, the obvious scandals that have happened that have been very public. There's no false reporting here. Do I share my opinion sometimes? Yes. But this is what they're really upset right now because they wanted to sweep this all under the rug. And so I reached out to an old friend of the Duggar family to find out what this is all about. And they said they're just pissed off that you're doing a story. They are just sheeple of the Duggars or the Wismans' false narrative about what's going on the past 20 years. They're trying to move on and brush the huge stains under the rug, meaning what's happened in the family. And I said, this wedding feels like damage control. I have never seen any of his daughters get this kind of royal send-off for a wedding. And the friend said, sure, they went underground for the whole engagement and dating process, so it was not to get any negative publishing out of it. And now that the wedding is public and all over the internet, they still don't want anything negative or truthful about anything. The friend believes that they kept this all under wraps, not just for financial purposes, but because it would reduce negative publishing attached to this relationship, and that this moment could serve as sort of a grandstanding for Jim Bob. In fact, they continued by saying, this is an opportunity to try to rewrite history about how these daughters have been second-class citizens in the Duggar family and have had to lie and handle sexual abuse in order to protect the family business Duggar Inc. and promote and grow Gothard's IBLP ministry. So they're trying to bend the thinking on what the true story of all that has gone on reflects to a new supply of converts that they can use to try to save Gothard's IBLP and the images of the leading families in the IBLP. And I said, oh, this actually makes sense. But Jana's dress is so not IBLP approved, and they said they've got to change the image and erase history for the show or the Gothard ministry to continue on. It's just morphed into a new form, and they're going to erase Josh Duggar and Bill Gothard from the history books of all of this stuff. So to them, all of this is sort of a way to flip the narrative and showcase the great family of the IBLP in a positive light. And so in their opinion, and this is someone that was friends with the Duggars for decades, knows very well how Jim Bob operates, has studied extensively how this IBLP utilizes the media and propaganda to push back. And even Jill wrote about in her book how they utilize a guy named Chad Gallagher to promote propaganda and positive information about the family to try to dispel and drown out the negativity. And so what the friend is saying is this wedding is a way to try to brush everything under the rug and sort of welcome in a new era of the Duggars and say, like, all of that happened before is not. And what you see before and what you saw before is not. And we're going to ignore all of the details about what's happened in the family. And all of it is because the wedding was so different, right? So they have to change the image to dispel what Jill said. And this is what a lot of cult leaders will do. As soon as one narrative is put out, they're going to do the exact opposite to try to prove that defector wrong. So Jill remains the scapegoat, and they're going to say, well, see, she lied. She said that my daughters don't have control, or that they can't have the weddings they want, or that we have to choose, or whatever. And this is why I think Jana's interviews were very much like blaming herself for not being able to find someone, even though it's Jill that writes in the book that no marriages can go through without their dad's approval. So at the end of the day, Jim Bob is using Jana almost as a sacrificial lamb to fulfill his agenda of trying to look better in the public's image. And he doesn't even have to say anything. He doesn't even have to have an image put out of himself. But he's going to try to intimidate people, whether it's by using, in my opinion, and I don't know if this is true, someone to reach out to me and say, you can't use these photos unless it's positive, or having someone email me and call me wicked and deceitful and untruthful. Regardless, I think it's important that the public remember that none of this changes the past. It doesn't change that Jana spent 34 years dedicating her life to her family, and all of those years were taken from her because she wasn't able to have a life outside of her family until she was married. And Jim Bob didn't let her move out. He's only letting her move out now because she's married, and she's 34. That's a lot. And for people that say, oh, she did move out, she was living in a tiny trailer on her parents' patio. She didn't even have a proper kitchen, and she had to go into her parents' house if she wanted a proper kitchen and to really have a proper bath, okay? She wasn't living there. It was like a bedroom outside of the house. She didn't leave the property. All of this is damage control, and that's why I keep saying is I hope Jana's happy. She looks happy. She looks happy. But that doesn't change the abuse that the kids have experienced. And I think even with Jill's statements, like it's Jana's choice, do you think if Jill, given the opportunity, had been asked to be involved in that wedding, she would have? I would say 100%. Because if anyone knows anything about Jill, is Jill loves her family, Jill loves her siblings, and Jill wants to have a relationship with her siblings. It's her dad that's made it next to impossible. I mean, we're talking about a man that tried to uninvite Jill and Derek to a Christmas party for a birthday for their niece of Hannah Wisman, Hannah Duggar's daughter, with Jeremiah. Jill was uninvited to a birthday party at the Duggars' house over Christmas because Jim Bob didn't want them there. That happened in December. So do you think suddenly in the last 6 or 7 months, he's changed his opinion about Jill and is like, yes, Janet, you can have Jill in your wedding? If Jim Bob's going to put the wedding on, I'm assuming Jill's not allowed to be in the bride's party. And he may have damaged the relationship so significantly between Jill and Jana that it doesn't have the safety for Jana to even consider having a relationship with Jill. The true test of all of this will be what happens with Jana next. Will she be able to share her own truth and her own story? Will she break away from some of these beliefs herself? Will she and Steven break away from some of these? Or will they continue in that insular world? Hannah Duggar, who's married to Jeremiah, from my accounts and what I've been told, has kind of struggled with the Duggars because where she came from, they didn't have these kinds of rules, and it didn't make sense to her that you wouldn't include Jill at a birthday party. So maybe this will allow healing in relationships with Steven at the helm. I don't know. I can only hope. There's never been any shade or degradation towards the Wisman family because, frankly, I don't know enough about them to say anything bad. I know they're not a part of the IBLP. I know that they're Mennonite. I've talked to some of the kids that are in the family. They all seem very kind and very nice. They all say they're not a part of the IBLP, and that's a good thing. So I would love to know what your thoughts are. Why does Jim Bob want to control the narrative so bad? Why is he making these kinds of threats? And do you now understand what Jill is facing? We want Jill, Jill is a scapegoat here at the end of the day, and I don't want people to forget what she and her sisters went through. One wedding doesn't erase that. And if Jim Bob thinks that he can walk back into society and be like, see, everything's fine, forget about Josh being in prison, don't think about Bill Gothard and all of the sexual assaults with him, we're moving on. And this is going to be used to showcase to the IBLP as like the redemption of the Duggar family. What are your thoughts on that? Let me know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up. Make sure to subscribe to my channel if you haven't subscribed, and click the bell so you never miss a video. Bye, everyone.